Sikkim 365 and Baylor Plus have teamed up to bring Baylor fans the ultimate content bundle. You can sign up now for $17.99 a month, a $5 monthly savings, and get instant access to all premium content on both websites. For more information, visit either sikkim365.com or baylorplus.com today. What's up, Baylor family? Welcome into Inside Baylor Sports, the official daily podcast of Baylor Athletics. It's Monday, October 6th, and Grace and I will be spending this episode recapping and discussing Baylor's 43-21 loss to Iowa State in Ames on Saturday. The Bears are headed into an off week, and it probably comes at a good time. Mentally, you know this team is going to be pretty beat up just through a grueling stretch of emotions and obviously 3 straight losses to Big 12 opponents to open up the league play, but physically as well. A lot of guys beat up in that game against Iowa State, guys who were hurt playing in that game that kind of came back for this game, and then guys who were completely out. But, I mean, there's a lot to overcome from that game. So, I mean, to the game specifically, Grayson, I mean, where do we even start? A lot of hope. I mean, you kind of go through that first 2 quarters in 6 minutes, I guess it was. And you're thinking, hey, like they have a shot. Everything's kind of coming together. No slow start in this game, fast start. But then it just kind of like a slow trickle into that deep third quarter. Iowa State just kind of turns it up a notch. And what Baylor was doing offensively, they took away and ultimately led to a game where they're blown out. And I don't want to call it indicative of this team overall, but like you hate to see a game end like that.
Right. I'm not sure that's indicative of who Baylor is. I think it's pretty clear, and most people would have said this, that Iowa State was the better team going into this game. Yeah. Expectation was Iowa State was going to beat them. But the track record that Baylor has had this year is, to be in the game. That's kind of what it has been this season. And then when you look at the negative stuff, it's starting slow, finishing poorly. That's also indicative of this team not being able to force turnovers, off and on special teams. Like, it's all indicative. So it all kind of wrapped up into this game. And then it just ended up being one of those things where they weren't able to overcome their deficiencies enough to keep this game close. And so this is what happens. Like, they've gone through moments like this. We saw it in the BYU game. They could have easily lost that game by 30 points had they just kind of rolled over. And then in this one, you get into the, really the second quarter, the pump block return for a touchdown. It's just like, you can't do that. Like, you can't do these things on the road if you want to win these type of games. And so then, yes, I know Baylor responded, but that play really felt like here we go again. Like this is probably going to unravel at some point. And obviously it did, as Iowa State just put up a record-setting performance, it felt like, on offense.
Yeah, it was. And we knew going into this game that Iowa State was probably going to show a lot more than they had. I think Iowa for Iowa State was the game where they kind of showed a little bit more. Houston, I mean, it was just more like, we know that Houston's not going to score on our defense. So it's just like, let's just kind of take care of business and get out of here playing at Houston. But then in this particular game, Baylor pushed Iowa State. And I think if there's anything that you take encouraging out of this, it was, one, they started fast. The passing game looked good again early with Sawyer Robertson. Receivers are making plays, and they pushed Iowa State more than they've been pushed pretty much the entire season. And into the, it was only 14 points. They only scored 14 points in the first half, but it was you felt pretty confident throughout the way that Baylor's offense was running. Sawyer's making plays. Unfortunately, still no running game. But overall, man, like, it was just like that slow start vanishes. There was no slow start. There are some plays that you expect. The block punt, kind of, you don't expect to play like that, but you're playing at Iowa State. Like, them to get a play like that at home is not unsurprising. Like, they're kind of known for that type of play under Matt Campbell. Really going back to Paul Rhodes in the air, like, at home, they're going to make those weird kind of plays, and they did it and scored a touchdown off it. Not just blocking a punt, but scoring a touchdown off of it. And that's twice this year that Baylor's had special teams, as good as they have been on special teams, a blocked field goal against Utah, a blocked punt against Iowa State, both on the road, both returned for touchdowns that kind of like set the tone for the rest of the game. So unfortunate situation there. I truly, man, like, I guess this is a question I had for you, like something I've thought about, like, if this game goes into the fourth quarter and it's still back and forth nature, but then the fourth quarter, Iowa State pulls away, similar they did over the course of, through the third quarter on, and this game ends up being a 13, 14-point game. Do you feel different about this than where Baylor ended up being a 43-21 game? Because the dynamics completely shifted because it was such a domination for the last quarter and a half.
Right. I think it probably depends how it goes, because honestly, I think if they played this game for another 15 minutes, Iowa State probably scores 3 more touchdowns. Sure. That's how the game ended. Baylor could not get a stop at all. They had no chance of getting a stop. And that was honestly the most just kind of shocking thing for me, that they couldn't tackle ball carriers in the open field. They couldn't tackle ball carriers behind the line of scrimmage. I think this was probably the worst game the defensive line has played all year. Yeah. It was pretty shocking. And I think the PFF grades speak to that a little bit. And that's the problem, right? Is that when I sit back and look at this, it's like, okay, this goes another quarter. Is Baylor getting any stops? Because I don't think so. And then Baylor's offense
at that juncture, I would not have expected them to. I think mentally that team was just done. Even at the end of the game, there was a minute and a half. And I'm watching the game on the television, and it's 4th down and 2. And Dave Aranda punts. And I said at that point, I was like, what was the ultimate goal for the end of that game? Was just get out of this game, be done with the game? Because what Iowa State, if you don't get that first down, all Iowa State was going to do was kneel the ball out. They were going to take 3 straight kneels. And so at that point, did Dave Aranda understand that my team has checked out? Let's just get out of this. That was my mindset. What was the point of punting at that juncture of the game? Because it didn't make any. Matt Campbell showed at the end of the game, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to kick a field goal. We're going to let you get a stop. He had already conceded. We're done. Okay. But then you punt. Well, maybe it was just a mutual understanding. We're going to punt too. We're going to do this and that. But I'm not sure I really understood the thought process, unless Dave Aranda just understood that his team was mentally checked out.
Well, and see, I know which one you're talking about, but the one that I go back to, honestly, was beginning of the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Beginning of the fourth quarter, you're down 33-21, and you have 4th and 1. And I know you're at your own 34, but it felt like it's tough to kind of put into perspective, just kind of thinking of it like this, because Baylor ends up getting blown out. But to start the second half, Baylor moved the football, and they'd kind of moved the football a lot during this game as well. And so you come out, they have the touchdown drive to start the second half. Then you come out and you just have, you drive down the field, things don't work out, turn the ball over, don't score, but you move the football once again. I think it was 10 plays, 55 yards.
Interception.
Yeah. 10 plays, 55 yards. You're moving the football. So clearly, Iowa State goes up 33-21. You got to be thinking to yourself, we're going to have to score points here.
Yeah.
And so for me, you get in a 4th and 1 pretty much anywhere, and you probably have to go for it, just because of the way the defense was playing, the way the offense was playing, and just the game flow, and they don't go for it. And honestly, that basically told me all I needed to know about kind of where this was going, because then Iowa State gets the ball, 5 plays, touchdown. And it's okay, ball game. I just feel like there could have been more aggressive play calling there, but also you might be right. Maybe it's just our defense has done good things all year. Maybe we'll get a stop, but nothing about that second half made me believe that Baylor was getting any stops, to be honest.
Yeah, and it was. And I think you give credit to Iowa State. I mean, they made plays. They made plays downfield. They exposed some weaknesses that we've seen. Pass interference specifically, it seems like this Baylor defense is going to get a couple of those. And you live and die by those, because I think at times if you say, I'm a defensive back, I'm beat. In college football, you get 15 yards wherever you are on the field. So you can almost sacrifice a couple of those. But then at other times, it's just every single possession, it seemed like Rocco Becht was throwing a pass short, and there was a pass interference and extending a drive. Now, Baylor got a couple of those early in the game that weren't exactly the ideal or a similar situation, similar type play. But Iowa State got them all late. And I'm not comparing officiating or anything like that. They got those calls late, and it helped them extend drives. And I don't know if that was I don't know if that's what the defense is for the rest of the year. I think Iowa State was one of those teams that are going to be extremely balanced. Like Baylor's going to face after their off week against Texas Tech, they're going to be extremely balanced. That just puts Baylor in binds where Dave Aranda can't really say we're going to take away this or this. They're both going to be present. And that puts, I mean, that's what you want to be as an offense. You want to be those things. But Iowa State did a great job of like, we're going to attack you at multiple levels here, where Baylor hasn't really been tested like that at all this year.
Right. And there's going to be multiple teams like that. And I would say Utah did challenge them in that way. And we saw them go down early. I mean, maybe we're not going to say Cam Rising was destroying them, but efficiency wise, they were moving the football on Baylor as well. And it was kind of that balanced approach. And we probably would have seen more of that had Rising not gotten hurt as well. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. The problem is like your next game against Tech, like no matter how bad I might think Tech is in some regards this year, they just went on the road and beat a team that just beat Utah. And they showed a lot of fight. They found a way to win. They have a balanced offense, like you just said, and Baylor's going to have to figure out a way to stop Baron Morton and Taj Brooks on the road. In my eyes, a must-win situation. Like if they don't win that game, I just don't know what you're kind of even like your goal is after that, because you're saying you basically have to win out essentially. You know, you have a little bit of room, but not really, especially when you have on the road to West Virginia on that slate as well. So yeah, I just think it's an interesting situation. And I think as we kind of took a step back and looked at their future schedule, again, there's games that are winnable, but when does this team start to not fight anymore? Like at what point, like if you go on the road to Lubbock off of a bye week, and if you don't come through with a win and you're sitting there at 2-5, I mean, it's going to be really tough, I think, to get guys up every single game, you know, moving forward. So that's a worry of mine for sure.
No, it is. And I think the way that Baylor's schedule is extended another game, like you looked at the beginning of the schedule this year and thought there's winnable games in there, especially with BYU at home, Colorado on the road. We didn't really know what they're going to be like. But now you extend that into Tech, and you're basically saying we faced number 16 Utah, who's number 16 currently. It was a non-conference game. Then it was number 14 BYU at home. Then it was number 11 Iowa State on the road. And now Tech, it's not in the top 25, but they're 5-1 now. Just beat Arizona, as you mentioned. So, like, you're talking, I don't know what the exact combined record is now between those teams. I guess it's if Utah's 4-1, Colorado's 4-1, that's 8-1, 18-2. And then you throw in Tech, that's 23-3 through that stretch of games. It's not ideal for Baylor setting up, but you're talking about games they had chances to win. And I think that's ultimately, like, you blew those chances. Like, you're stomaching this game a little bit more against Iowa State if you beat Colorado potentially, or you split between Colorado and BYU, and you're in a much different position. But instead of being 3-3, now you're 2-4. Everything's looking like an uphill battle. And that's the most discouraging part for me, is like, you had your chances. You had those opportunities to get them. In the Iowa State game, you go into that. I mean, just put in perspective. If they were 4-1 going in that game, and they're potentially in the top 25, maybe not even the top 25, and you go and give 2.5 quarters of pure on football, and you are battling with them, and then you have some bad breaks at the end of the game, you say, hey, I would say it was a good team. Now we're 4-2. The complete vantage point changes for me personally. You say, hey, we battled Iowa State. Iowa State is going to have a chance to win the conference this year, but it's everything that compounded up until that point. And now it's like, where does this team find life? Can they overcome this mentally? They've been beaten 3 completely different ways over the last 3 weeks.
Right. And I think your point is super valid. It's like proof of concept, right? Like if you're able to win a few of those games, it's like, okay, that means that sets a precedent for you being able to win games in the future. The problem is like their 2 wins are not good wins. Like they haven't beaten anybody. And so now you got to sit back and go, okay, they haven't beaten anybody. The 4 teams that they've played, okay, their record is good, but they're Big 12 teams, right? So you're going to have to face Big 12 teams the rest of the season. And where's the proof that the wins are going to start coming? It's more just kind of hoping that these other teams are bad and that you can take advantage of that. That's kind of and that's not a great place to be. That's not a great feeling, I don't think, for anyone involved. And so that's why, like, you gear up to this bye week, you get an opportunity to try to get healthy, try to get your mental side right. Because like I said, you go into Lubbock and, in my eyes, a must-win situation against a team that now has some momentum. And I frankly, I thought they were going to lose to Arizona. I didn't even think it was going to be close. And they showed up for a 10 o'clock game on the road and found a way to win. And so now that adds a lot more pressure to Baylor and a lot more probably uncertainty with which direction I'm going to be leaning in that game, because right now I can't find any reason that I would pick Baylor to beat Texas Tech on the road.
Yeah. Well, if there is one right now, and I want to talk about this because I think if we go through this whole discussion and don't talk about Sawyer Robertson, it's unjust. Like, I think that we have to do this, and that's going to be the way in that particular game against Tech in 2 weeks. Of if Baylor's going to win that game, it's going to come down to the offense scoring points, because they're probably going to have to, unless Baylor's defense just can rebound entirely for this particular game. And I think there'll be some more extra motivation. It is Tech. It is a rivalry game. There's a lot of factors going into that, but Tech is going to move the football very balanced offensively, defensively. So if Baylor's going to have a chance in that, it's going to come down to Sawyer Robertson. And, man, like, I know that Baylor fans aren't going to be really willing to pull out a lot of positives from this, but Sawyer Robertson continues to play really good football. And I mentioned this last week, and in the way his consistency. And so he had an 88.4 QBR in this game. And that's just basically equating everything that he does. First downs with his feet, first downs with his arm, obviously efficiency, yards per pass. I mean, everything that he does. And if you look back through Baylor's history, nobody has done what he has done dating back to Seth Russell. And that's in basically 5 straight starts now. Going back to West Virginia last year, he has graded at least 77.5 or above. And so, like, you got to go back to Seth Russell to understand how good that he's playing football. He wasn't sacked. His pocket awareness was great against Iowa State. He did have the interception that everybody points to as kind of the turning point of that game. I mean, he was trying to make a play. He had been making them all night. And I think that's when everything kind of fell off for Baylor. But overall, man, like, he just continues to make plays. And you wanted to see this from this offense. You bring in Jake Spavital because he's a good quarterback coach. You know he's going to be able to throw the football. He's going to be efficient with the passing game as long as there's pass protection. And Sawyer Robertson continues to make plays. And I think if there's anything that Baylor can hang their hat on right now going to this last half of the or exactly the last 6 games, the last half of the season, is the potential of this offense with Sawyer Robertson to go out there and win a game for them. A lot of things had to go right for him to beat Iowa State, but he showed once again how good of a competitor he is. And truly, like, he's becoming a better quarterback, a good, I would say, I mean, at this juncture, he is a good quarterback, and we did not know that going into this season.
I would definitely agree with that. He's playing really good football. And I mean, this is a really tough situation to be thrown in, to have to go on the road to Ames and put together a good performance. And he absolutely did that for 3 quarters. You know, the 4th quarter, things fell off for everybody, including him. They did not move the ball very well in the 4th quarter. And so you'd like to see 4 quarters from everyone. And we've talked about not just Sawyer, but I feel like he's got a good relationship with these receivers as well. And kind of pinpointing that is, like, you go back through his starts, it feels like the top receiver almost changes every start, which is great to see. Like, you're seeing a lot of variety there. You're seeing Michael Trigg and Ketron Jackson at the top this week. Last week, Hal Presley and Josh Cameron had a great performance. They still haven't fully unleashed Monterey Baldwin up to this point. And Ashton Hawkins, again, was more in the mix against BYU than this week. But it changes a lot, which gives me a good sense that he's not just focusing on one read. He's doing a nice job of scanning the whole field, finding the open guy, and allowing them to go out there and make a play. And so he's doing a really nice job. I mean, that's a great bright spot for the future. I mean, Sawyer looks like the quarterback of the future for these next, 2 years. And I think that's big. I would also say that there's not a lot of favors being done when you can't run the football at all. No. And like, it is really bad. Like, they are not running the ball at all. This game, 20 carries for 79 yards and 3 for 24 was Sawyer Robertson.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're talking about, what is that? 55 yards rushing. from your running backs. That's not getting it done. And especially when you look at the other side and Iowa State has 265 yards rushing on you, you're not going to win a lot of football games like that.
Yeah, no, it's unfortunate. And there was a play in the game, and it was either in the second quarter. Like, I truly cannot remember when it was, but it felt like one of those turning point moments of the game. And I guess it was in the second quarter, but it was when Baylor actually had 3 or 4 runs where pretty steady, like 4 or 5 yards, and then he get into a second down situation where Bryson has a lot of room to the left side. And dude, and like, I sent this message to I don't know how many people, and sorry to any Iowa State fans who might be tuning in. It's like, that field absolutely drives me crazy. I feel like every year that Baylor plays up there, and in this game in particular, Baylor players are slipping everywhere. And it's a true home field advantage opportunity for them because their players they understand what they're playing on. And they're running. Iowa State players have success on that field the way they do because they practice. But like, how many times did I see Garmin Randolph in the open field slip and fall? And I'm not saying he's 6'8". He's not the most coordinated guy when in comparison, but there's so many guys that did that throughout the game. And that particular play in the run game, it was almost like a deflating moment. Like, okay, we can't try to run anymore. Again, at that point, I don't know if the running backs carried another ball from the rest of the second quarter into the second half. And a lot of that was because it was, you needed to pass the ball, but you're right. There's no running game right now, but I will say this, to Jake Spavital's credit, he has figured out how to get short yards, right? So like, and not short yards, like we're converting a 3rd and 1, but we're going to supplement the passing game, and it's going to give Sawyer more attempts, but it's wide receiver screens that get 3 yards this way to get 4, whatever it was. Like, I have been very thankful to have an offensive coordinator that's done it a little unorthodox to move the football, because it has helped the entire offense just to have those different components. And it does give me faith, man. Like, I've watched a lot of Big 12 football this year, and intentionally just to see everyone. And I try to do it every year, but like, Baylor has played the upper echelon of defenses in the league so far. And if you get into the second half and you're executing those things right now, you hope that you start breaking some of those wide receiver screens. I don't know how many they threw against Iowa State that they could, like, Iowa State just make great tackles, ankle tackles where they could have broken for 15 yards. And you hope those things begin to pop in the future.
Right. And I mean, that would be great if they do. I think, you are right. The defenses that they've played have been really difficult and challenging for a variety of reasons. And pretty much all of them just play such steady football and have good cultures implemented. And a lot of their cultures are built around defense, with the exception of Colorado, who is just improving on defense. They just have a better defense this year than most people thought. They don't have a culture of it, but the other schools do, like BYU, Iowa State, Utah, really, really good defensive schools. And so, Baylor's had to deal with a lot in that regard. And so now the schedule flips, but this is where the next conversation has to happen is that you didn't play the top explosive offenses in the conference, and now you're about to. And some of these teams put up a lot of points on you. Colorado is one of the most explosive offenses, but BYU, Iowa State, both scoring above 34 points. Like, that's tough when you turn around and you go, okay, how many points is Tech going to score? If you can't stop the pass, how many points is TCU going to score? West Virginia just had an impressive win, and they can run it and pass it. They have a lot of weapons in that regard. And even Kansas, Kansas can move the ball. They just can't win close games. They've been all of their games for the most part have been really close. They can't win them. It's an interesting dynamic. It's the same thing. And we've talked about it since the beginning of the year. And this is probably my biggest, just in general, concern. This team does not have an identity. And that is the root of the issue. Are you an offensive team or are you a defensive team? And unfortunately, it's changed game by game. And I just don't think I don't think in the long run that works out. You really got to be really good at one or the other. If you're just okay and you kind of take turns every game, then you have moments like this where you feel like your offense played pretty good, but then you gave up 43 points. And so that's kind of the dilemma, and it's something that I think Baylor's still working around and still working towards. It's just unfortunate because now we're halfway through the season.
Yeah, and it's, I think we all expected it to an extent. I mean, you change offensive coordinators, you change schemes entirely, bring in transfers. I mean, even look back to DeQuan Finn. He was brought in to run a particular offense because it was a new offense and you had the opportunity to do it. Dave Aranda takes over as play caller on defense. You don't change scheme, but there's so many moving pieces. Like, when does this team settle in? And I think we said it, I mean, after the BYU game, after the Colorado game, after the BYU, when does this team finally click? And now we're sitting here, it's like, man, I don't know if they can. I think there's still that opportunity for them to kind of put it all together. I think Iowa State, that game particularly, I think because Baylor pushed them offensively, it made Iowa State just say, okay, we're ready to take it up a gear. We're going to have to take it up again. We realize that. So maybe we saw more of Iowa State's potential in that game of what they're going to be capable of doing. They have a tough schedule coming up. We'll find out more and more about them. I think for my piece going into the last 6 games, and we can talk about the future of the program or whatever, but right now I'm talking about winning football games, figuring out how to win the games that are in front of you, because if you're a competitor, you want to win those games. If I know that my offense has gone up against the toughest defenses they should face, I would say with the exception of probably Houston. I think Houston's showing that they're one of the better defensive teams in the league. I would say upper half at least, but in terms of who Baylor's facing. But if I know that I can go in the game and my offense has the potential to score me points, I'm not ready to say that I'm not confident in the defense. I think the defense will bounce back. I think that they will get better based on Dave Aranda's, his portfolio and what he's capable of doing. I think there's guys on that side of the ball that care too much to let that define them. And so it's like, okay, offense, continue to chug along. Let's see if we can create something. Let's go see if we can score 45 points in a game and get a win that we shouldn't get. I think they have that potential as they face these teams that have shown more warts on the defensive side of the ball. I think that it's just like, figure out how to win. I don't care if it's 45-42. Do it. Like, if it's 4th and 1 in the third quarter, late in the third quarter, don't punt the football. Like, you got to win games. And I don't care. Like, if that means that you end up getting beat by 14 more points than you should have, whatever. Go and try to score the football. If you have an opportunity to make that game close, keep that game closer than Iowa State might have anticipated. Don't go punt the football. Rely on what's kind of gotten you to that point in the game. And that's all I want to see in these last 6 games. I think they have to show that ability to be resilient and continue to play. Because if you start giving up on the road in games where you're still in the game, I don't think that bodes well for the rest of the season.
It doesn't with the schedule they have left. I mean, they have to go to Lubbock. They got to go to Morgantown. And I mean, like I said, you're going to have to win one of those games probably to have a shot at making a bowl game, I would think. We can argue about it. We can say, oh, well, if they just win the other 4, okay, well, that's nice in theory, but I do think you're probably going to have to win one. And really, I think it's the Tech one, because 2-5 and having to look at that is tough mentally and physically to make sure you're up every single game, especially again for a program that has not proven that it can be up for every single game. Like that has not been consistent. And so now you got to turn this corner. You got to find ways to win, like you said. And I think this bye week comes at a time where they needed it. They have to regroup. Yeah. They have to figure out who they are, figure out what they can do and what they can't do. And then figure out, these offenses that they're going to face and how they're going to game plan for them, as well as, kind of what they want to show on the offensive side going forward as well. I think there's been bright spots. I think the pass game has really taken big steps forward with Sora Robertson. I think defensively, they've had moments. They've had like halves where they play great. They just haven't been able to put together a full game. If you want to say the Air Force game, that's fine. I just don't think Air Force is very good. I'm talking about against a quality opponent. It's been kind of off and on. And so can it all come together down the back half? I'm not going to sit here and say I'm super optimistic, but I will say that I do think there will be chances to have close games and chances to win. And that just comes down to, can they actually take advantage of those chances? And it's really tough though, Colt, when you look at like the Big 12 standings and you see teams like Arizona State at 4-1, Texas Tech at 5-1, BYU at 5-0, Colorado at 4-1. There's just a lot of programs that are kind of having really good seasons that in my eyes, I think Baylor is a better program than all of them. And so that's kind of a tough thing to, I think, look at.
Yeah, and that's going to be reality with this new Big 12 of you have so many teams in the league. You're playing unbalanced schedules. You're playing different opponents. I mean, we mentioned earlier, Baylor's now played, 3 top 25 teams that are all currently in the top 25. Iowa State number 11, BYU 14, Utah 16, Colorado, who's 4-1 receiving votes. I don't know what votes they got this week for the AP or coaches. And then Tech, I would assume they're receiving votes. I didn't see today if they were or not, but they face a much different Tech specifically, not picking on Tech. That's just who's next up. A much different challenging type of challenge with their schedule. I mean, talk about you face Cincinnati, who has a very good offense. You face Arizona at Arizona, which is obviously they weren't a top 25 team, but you and I were pretty high on them going into that game. Obviously beat Utah. And then you look at what they have done to become 5-1. And it's just like, well, they're 5-1. But what do we truly know about them compared to what we know about Baylor? I know Baylor's lost games, but Baylor's been challenged in a different way, particularly on the defensive side of the Baylor's offense has been challenged differently than Tech has on the defensive side of the ball.
I agree. I just would say that the difference is that, Tech, even with, their injuries on defense and how bad they were on defense, they still found ways to win.
Yeah.
And
no, it's all about it. Yeah.
In close games. I mean, yeah, the teams they were playing maybe aren't that good, but like they've won 3 games or 4 games now that have been within a score.
Yeah.
I think they're 4.
Opposite of Baylor. Yeah.
Yeah. 4-0 or something in that regard. And so, yeah, that's something that they've been able to do. Yes, schedules. And unfortunately, it ends up being a bad break, Baylor's schedule. And it's probably going to play out as a bad break.
That's the new reality of the Big 12. I mean, when you have teams that are playing, you're playing non-conference games. Half the teams are going to play 5 away games. Half of the teams are going to play 5 home games every single year. They're going to align like this at times. And it's just reality of what this larger it's not 10 teams anymore where everybody gets to play 9 games. Like that's not what's going to happen anymore. Baylor had 8 home games last year. They should have taken full advantage of that last year when it was in their favor. They didn't. Now they're faced with this. And briefly, I want to talk about this, and we mentioned this before we got on air, but if you look at ESPN's FPI projections for Baylor's remaining schedule, and we're going to dig into more of this later into the week because it is a bye week, but percent chance to win these games, Baylor's the final 6, it's Texas Tech at 32.2%, Baylor's chances to win, Oklahoma State 44.9%, TCU 49%, West Virginia 28.2%, Houston 56.8%, Kansas 47.1%. So basically you have 4 games of those 6 that are coin flips. I mean, that's a reality of what these metrics say. These are not, these are computer models saying we're looking at everybody you've played, all of your statistics, and Baylor has basically 4 toss-up games. The Iowa State game was not a toss-up game. It was like Baylor maybe 30%. I don't know what the last number was. So more kind of like what the Tech game was, what the West Virginia game was. But the other 4, you're basically saying we don't really know who's going to win these games, though you'll get more data points every single week. But right now, 4 games is what you need to win, and that means that you're either going to have to upset Tech or West Virginia or win the other 4 games on the schedule outright. Fortunately, Oklahoma State, TCU, and Kansas are all at home. Houston at Houston, but that is your best chance to win a game at 56.8%. So, it's not just the eye test; it's kind of that complete overlook of analytics, computer models, everything you can imagine says Baylor still has a chance to make a bowl game, and that you have to feel at least somewhat good about that. That it's not just hoping and spitting in the hand and hoping that something comes true. Like they're going to have the opportunity as long as they don't mentally continue to be unstable from these last 3 games.
Right. And I mean, Houston's 2-4, TCU's 3-3, Oklahoma State's 3-3, and Kansas is 1-5. I mean, that very winnable games. But it's about getting it done, going out and actually getting it done. It's easier said than done. And so, yeah, and that's the other thing, you mentioned the FEI. Well, most of these things are saying that Baylor's going to lose to Tech and West Virginia.
Yeah.
And then it's like counting on them to win the other 4. It's an interesting situation. I don't know that there's really been a year that I could compare to this year. Like if Baylor did go on a run at the end of the year, it would probably have to be something like that 2012 team with Nick Florence, where they started so poorly and they ended up, winning quite a few games down the stretch and getting to a bowl game. They unleashed Lake Seastrunk. They just had all this momentum at the end. They beat number 1 Kansas State. Totally different situation. But like if you're going to have a end of season, that's like the closest one that I can think of potentially comparing it to if Baylor can actually get to that point.
Yeah. So you're talking about that team, and that was a really interesting overturn of you win the Heisman Trophy, you come back, and everybody thinks you're going to fall off, and it looked like for a while it was going to, and then that team completely came together at the end of the year. And I don't have the schedule in front of me, but I believe they lost 5 in a row.
I think that's right.
And then went on that run, and they finished the regular season 7-5, won the Holiday Bowl over UCLA. And like, there's potential for something like that in here, but you're going to have to upset somebody on the road more than likely for that to happen. Not upset Houston. It's either Tech or West Virginia upset. And they're not unwinnable games, but they're going to be challenged. So Baylor wasn't. I don't think Baylor was 2-4 that particular year, but they started off 3-0. But every single one of their games in non-conference were extremely close when they shouldn't have been. And then they lost so many in a row. And so like, there's some precedents, but you're also talking about 12 years ago, different coaching staff and a whole bunch of shit. But it would be ideal for something like that to happen, obviously.
Right. And they started 3-0, and then they were 3-5. Like you mentioned.
Well, yeah.
So,
yeah.
Or 3-4. 3-4.
3-4, 4-4, but then they were 4-5.
4-5 down the stretch.
With 3 games to go. Turned around, won 3 in a row, beat number 1 Kansas State, won over Texas Tech in overtime in Arlington, and then beat number 23 Oklahoma State, and then obviously beat number 17 UCLA. So the end of the season there was terrific, and it's actually a much lighter schedule if you're looking at it right now. What Baylor has coming up, that they finished with number 12 Oklahoma, number 1 Kansas State, Texas Tech, number 23 Oklahoma State. So like you're looking, if you go back to that season, I don't remember my mindset at that particular point, but I'm probably thinking, they're making a bowl game. There's no way they're going to make a bowl game. And then it completely flipped. And
well, it really, Cole, the game that like sprungboard them to the finish was getting crushed in Ames by Iowa State, 35-21. And then
that was a miserable game too. I remember
miserable.
That.
Yeah, they couldn't do anything right. It was like everything went wrong, and then they totally turned the tide down the second half there. A lot of it was just, I think they got comfortable with all the new guys that they had, and Lake Seastrunk obviously played a huge role in that turnaround as well. They kind of really set him loose. And so, that's the only season that I could think of in my time of watching Baylor that I could be like, if they go on a run like this is kind of the season that I would look back to as, okay, this is kind of what has happened in Baylor history, and maybe this Baylor team is able to capture some of that magic. We'll see. Right now, I think everything looks bleak, and I think everyone's mindset is very negative right now. I think for good reason. I think there's valid reasons for it, and so now it's about, can Baylor during this bye week find itself again? And get itself right so that it can go on a run the rest of this year against, like we've said, a fairly favorable schedule.
Yeah. Interesting thing about that Iowa State game in 2012, when Baylor ended up being 3-4 after that game, Baylor got out to a 14-7 lead in that game. And then Iowa State completely flipped the script. 14-7 turned into 35-14 for Iowa State before Baylor scored late to make it 35-21. So they were down 21 points in the fourth quarter of that game, and before scoring a late touchdown. So very similar, actually. And I remember that game being a night game too. And I mean, if they can repeat that, like if you can recreate that, maybe there should be some Dave Aranda showing some of that footage of that game against Iowa State and Baylor ultimately being 8-5. There might be some good mojo in there, but yeah, all right, Baylor family, that's going to do it for today's episode of Inside Baylor Sports. As always, thanks to each of you for listening. For Grayson Grudenhafer, I'm Colt Barber. Have a great Monday, and sick 'em Bears.